So we're going to get started, everybody. Hello. Um, I don't know if Rabbi Kalman is showing up. He did not write me. So we will start without him. And I just again give the sponsorship because it's for the whole series. This series has been sponsored by an anonymous donor in memory of Yisrael ben Aryeh Leib Zal climbing around sites in Eretz Yisrael. So we are hoping that Yisrael ben Aryeh Leib is enjoying learning about all these new sites. And by Naomi and Mark Chernin, in honor of the IDF, may Hashem continue to give Am Yisrael strength, and may we be blessed with peace. That's a good segue into dedicating our learning, as always, to the safe and immediate return of our hostages, the safety of our soldiers and their success, the refuah shlema, refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf of everyone who needs it. And let's get started. Let's get started. So we are on our third class, and we're going to be, again, we're moving forward in time. Um, yes, okay. Um, and today we're going to be talking about the time period. Our first object is really from Roman time period, from the 2nd century. Our second object is later, it's from the Byzantine, but it does show the impact of the Romans and living in the Roman world. So really that's why I called it Romans and Jews. We are talking about, if last time we were in Second Temple times and talking about the Beit HaMikdash and the impact of the Beit HaMikdash on purity and so many other things, today we are going to be post the destruction of the temple in a world where the Romans are very, very powerful and the Jews are not, right? The Jews have no power. They attempt with the Bar Kokhba revolt to regain some of that power, but they are unsuccessful. And our questions with our objects today is, where do we fit into this Roman world? What do we adopt? What do we reject? What do the Romans impose on us? How is our world changed in this new reality? And the picture that I put in here, this guy who looks like he's in the Thanksgiving Day parade or something, right? This is Helios, the sun god. But contrary to what we might think, and you might be able to notice it even up here in the corner, upside down, you've got Hebrew writing, Taleh. Okay, sure. This is not from a pagan temple. This is from a synagogue. This is from the synagogue in Hamat Tveria, the outskirts of Tveria, and it is a synagogue which has imagery which last time we were like, whoa, that's not something we would find anymore. And that's one of the things we're going to be discussing later, and the impact of the Roman world, but also how do Jews feel about imagery. So that's just where I put this picture in, kind of an intersection of Roman mythology and the Jewish world. But we're really going to start with the Romans. And just to get our timeline, just to understand what we're talking about, right? First of all, just important kind of overarching our timeline after the destruction of the temple, and much more so after the Bar Kokhba revolt, right? Bar Kokhba revolt in the first half of the 2nd century of the Common Era. Jewish life moves, right? Jewish life, which in Second Temple times was in various places. We have Jews who are living, as we saw last time, in the Galil and Eber Yarden, but Jewish life is focused on Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple, and even more so after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Jewish life migrates. Jews are not allowed to live in Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba revolt, and Jews move largely to the north, to the Galilee, to the Golan, somewhat also to the south, southern Hebron Hills, the center, Lud, right? Places like that, but really largely to the north. So that's kind of an overarching idea that we're just going to keep in mind. And the synagogue that we're going to look at later is in the north. Okay, but just some of the things we're going to be talking about, just to get our dates in our minds. Around 4,000 years ago, we have arches, the oldest arches in the world, right? Built in Tel Dan and in Ashkelon, because we're going to be talking about arches. So I want to put that in. Okay, 5th century before the Common Era, the Temple of Jupiter is built on the Capitoline Hill in Rome. It's destroyed and rebuilt many times, but this is its first iteration, really at the very beginning of the city of Rome. 5th century BCE. The year 70, of course, Jerusalem is conquered, the temple is destroyed. 117 Hadrian, who's going to be our focus for our first object. Hadrian becomes the Roman emperor, and he comes to visit Judea in the year 130. And after that, and today scholarship, new scholarship is kind of extending this time period. These are the traditional dates we give for Bar Kokhba revolt, but different people are studying this and saying really it's more elastic, but we're going to stick with these dates just to simplify for now. 132 to 135 is the Bar Kokhba revolt. Jerusalem is changed and renamed as Aelia Capitolina. When does that happen? Before the revolt, after the revolt? We're going to talk about that, but certainly Jews are banned from Jerusalem after the revolt, and they don't come back for 500 years till the Muslim conquest, at least officially, right? People might have snuck in. And finally, for our second object, we're going to be in the 6th century, and we're going to be in the time period of the Emperor Justinian. Okay. And that's when the Beta Alpha mosaic is made. We don't know exactly, but we know it's in that time period. And it's only discovered 1,500 years later in 1928, discovery of the Beit Alpha synagogue by members of the kibbutz. Okay, so that's just to give us our time period, big gadol. Okay, object number one, a large Roman arch. Okay, as we're going to see as we go on, this is what's called a triumphal arch. It is freestanding. It's got 3 parts, right? It's got this 2 little arches on either side, and the main one in the middle, it is not connected to a wall. It's got an inscription on it. And it is one of 4 triumphal arches that exist in Roman Jerusalem. This one, we have discovered a really perfect intact piece below Shar Shechem, below the Damascus Gate. So we're going to be able to see that. But the other thing I want you to notice, so we want to notice a few things about this arch. It's really a beautiful thing. Okay. We've got, like we said, our 3 pieces. 1, 2, 3. Yes, I'm not so good at writing numbers like this. Okay. We've got an inscription up here that we're going to be looking at. Okay, and we've got, this we'll talk about at the very end of this object, we've got a pillar with a statue of the emperor on it. Okay, and we've got this fellow here to give you a sense of the scale. Okay, so that's just to understand what it is that we're looking at. Now we'll understand where it is, but this is obviously a drawing, a reconstruction, right? But we do have quite a nice piece of this side of the eastern arch. Okay, so we have the most beautiful gate in the gates of the old city, is Shar Shechem, is the Damascus gate. It's the gate that leads directly into the Muslim quarter. It leads directly into the Shuk. It's not a gate that, it's a gate that has had its share of troubles, and that's why not everybody always feels comfortable going in there. But it's definitely one of the 2 most important gates around the old city, the other one being Jaffa Gate, right? Damascus Gate, Shar Shechem, 2 different names, but with the same meaning, i.e., it's a gate that faces north. Right? When you go out of it, you are going north, north towards Ramallah, north towards Shechem, north east towards Damascus, right? That's the idea. It's got these beautiful crenellations, these decorations on the top, okay? And this is what the gate looked like. This picture is probably about 120 years old, right? 1900-ish, okay? It's got these nice sheep in the forefront, right? But if you've been to Shar Shechem in the last 30 years, you know that it's not a flat, we don't just walk in like this, but instead there are steps that go down to like a little plaza, and then you go in. This is an innovation that Israel did after the Six-Day War. They wanted to create kind of this public space. Today, unfortunately, it's become a little bit of a flashpoint when things are going on, whether it's Yom Yerushalayim or other times of the year, Arab riots. This is a place that things happen. But the idea was it was meant to be a commercial center. But when they made these steps and this plaza going down, they uncovered something which people knew existed, right? They had found it. It was had first been noticed in the 1930s, slightly excavated in the 60s, but only in 1978 does Israel excavate this gate on the bottom here. Okay, this is our beautiful Eastern Gate. We're going to see another picture of it in a minute. The middle gate no longer exists because it was just built, destroyed, built, destroyed. It's more or less in the same place, but obviously it's somewhat higher up. The Western Gate on the other side, we have a little bit left of it, but not very much. But here it is. It was hiding, was waiting to be discovered, and now it's been uncovered, and actually you can go and visit it. It was actually closed for a while. It's reopened now and they have a whole exhibit inside. But let's understand what this is. So first of all, just to get a better picture of it, right? Here it is. It's almost perfectly intact. That's why I keep saying it's so beautiful. A lot of it, the stones that are used are these very lovely Herodian stones, the stones that have that frame, right? The Romans come along, as we're going to see. This is a gate that's built in the time of Hadrian, so this is not long after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, after the destruction and the conquest of Jerusalem, right? If Hadrian's building this in the 130s, so we're talking about 60 years after the Khurban, the stones are lying around. They're not going to let them go to waste. They are going to use them. Okay, so we have these reused stones, and on the top, you definitely cannot see it. If you go, you can sort of faintly see it, but we're going to see it, rewritten. But on the top is an inscription. And the inscription, as we know, we always love inscriptions, right? The inscription is going to tell us who made this gate and what's the story about it. Okay, so on top of the gate, it says these initials, right? First it says Hadrian, but it also says COAEL CAPDD. What does this stand for? Oh, by the way, I apologize. This was a bit of a crazy week. I did not make a source sheet, so I will make one and have it put up on the website. Meanwhile, you can just see it in the slideshow. Okay, so what does this stand for? It stands for, and we have so many Roman inscriptions, so we really know from other ones what things stand for. This stands for Colonia, Aelia, Capitolina, Decreto Decurionum. Okay, if you have good Latin, you might be able to understand this. Okay, the colony of Aelia Capitolina decreed by the 10 elders, right? By the 10, the 10, I don't know what's the word that I want, right? Well, 10 chosen ones is what I wrote here. Okay, so colony, we understand. Decree, 10, like the Moetzet Ha'ir, maybe the city council, we get all of that. What's Aelia Capitolina? Okay, we know that Emperor Hadrian comes along, and we'll discuss whether it's before or after the Bar Kokhba revolt, but he wants to change the identity not only of Jerusalem, but of all of Judea. Okay. He changes the name Judea to Palestina, which is the name that sticks for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. Why does he do this? Not because there are any more Palestinians, i.e., Plishtim, Philistines around. They're not around. They don't exist as a nation. They haven't existed as a nation in at least 500 years. Okay? But he says, who's the worst enemy of the Jews? The Philistines. Let's take away their identity. Let's erase their identity, and let's give it to these people who are just there, anathema to them. And that's why, obviously, for this crowd, you don't need to be told, but I'll just say it anyway. If we have any outliers, Palestinians today are not in any way connected to the Plishtim. Okay. And those of us who have old books at home or talk to their parents or grandparents will remember that before 1948, Palestine was the Jewish place, right? You had little Katantan who sends a letter to Palestine, right? Or the Palestine Post, which today is the Jerusalem Post, right? So Palestine was just the name of this country, but it's a way to uproot the Jewish content. And Aelia Capitolina is perhaps even worse. I don't know. I don't know if it's worse. It's different, right? When he changes Judea to Palestina, he's basically reviving an ancient enemy of the Jewish people. When he's changing Jerusalem to Elia Capitolina, he's saying two things. Number one, Elia is the family genealogy of Hadrian. My city, this is my city. Okay? Capitolina, even more difficult, right? In Rome, one of the major places in Rome, in the center of the Forum, and one of the seven hills of Rome, is what's called the Capitoline Hill, and this is where there's the temple to Jupiter. Okay, the Capitoline Triad are the three Roman city gods, or the patrons of the city. This guy in the middle is Jupiter. Jupiter is the Roman version of Zeus. Okay, he's the king of all the gods. And we have his sister, who's also his wife, Juno. Okay, and their daughter, Minerva. And these are the three Roman city gods. So basically, what is Hadrian doing with this name? He has already just he has not. The Romans have already destroyed the temple. Okay. By doing this, he's taking away Jewish identity from the city, and eventually he's going to ban Jews altogether from living in the city. Um, so this is a very, very drastic change when he gives this name of Elia Capitolina, and it's a name that sticks around, right? Arabs have different names for Jerusalem. One of them, of course, is Al-Quds, but one of them is Ilya. Ilya comes from Elia Capitolina. Okay, so it's really taking this and taking Jerusalem and making it into a very, very Roman name. And this is where we get to the overwhelming power of Rome. Okay. Before we look at the map, just to look at a couple of sources. Again, people who have been learning Daf Yomi, Avodah Zarah, talking so much about the nations that surround us. So in the very beginning, on the first stop of Avodah Zarah, there's this fantastic story where all the nations have to come before God, and God says, "Okay, what'd you do? What'd you do in the world? Are you good?" And everyone has to justify themselves, and of course, none of them are good, except for the Jews. And who are the first that are called to appear? The Romans. Why are they the first? Because they're the most important. Rabbi Yochanan says, "This empire that will devour the earth is the wicked Roman Empire, whose name spread throughout the world." Okay, so the Romans are extraordinarily powerful by this point, by the second century of the Common Era. And just to look at this map, you really understand why. Okay, they completely encompass the Mediterranean. One of the names of the Mediterranean, the Roman name for the Mediterranean is Mare Nostrum. Okay, here it says Mare Internum, the Middle Sea, which is what Mediterranean means. But they also called it Mare Nostrum, the Our Sea. Our sea, right? Our local sea, because we control everything all around it. Hey, the Roman Empire reaches in the northwest all the way to Britain, in the southeast all the way to Babylonia. Okay, its major enemy at this point are the Parthians. We, Eretz Israel, right, Judea, we are on this border, or very close to this border, so that's why we're very significant, even though we're not so important, but we're significant because we're on the border. This is the map in the time of the Emperor Trajan, who's the predecessor to Hadrian. Trajan, Hadrian are two of what are called the five good emperors, right? And if you learn Roman history, this is considered to be a good time because it's a time of stability. It's a time when the empire expands, the roads are safe, things are good. Okay, when we look in Jewish sources that talk about Hadrian, what do we call him? He's called Adrianus Shrik Atzamot. Hadrian, his bones should be destroyed or disturbed. We don't like him very much. But in the Roman world, he is considered to be someone who, in the Western world, let's say, who brings a lot of stability. Okay. There's a hope that Jews have a hope that perhaps the Beit HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt. This is frustrated. And this is the story that we have here in Breshit Rabbah. Great story about Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's student, Rabbi Akiva's teacher. The assembly of Israel were gathered together in the Beit Rimmon Valley. When these missives arrived, right, this is the whole story talks about how the Romans want to build the Beit HaMikdash, but then it seems that they want to have idols in it. And so the Jews, of course, are very upset. They began weeping. They wanted to rebel against the empire. They said, let one sage enter and calm the assembly. They said, let Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania, who was the greatest Torah scholar, enter. He entered and expounded. A lion mauled prey and a bone was stuck in his throat. The lion said, anyone who extracts it, I will give him a reward. It's Aesop fable as well. An Egyptian heron with a long beak inserted its beak and extracted it. It said to the lion, give me my reward. The lion said, go boast and say that you entered the mouth of a lion in peace and emerged in peace. So it is sufficient that we entered into dealings with this nation in peace and emerged in peace. Don't ask for more than what you're going to get, says Rabbi Yoshua. We got out of this without being destroyed yet again. We should, Dayenu, we should be happy with that. And this is really the Jewish problem, right? One of many. How do we deal with Rome, right? How do we deal with Rome? We have this incredibly powerful empire whose ideology is so opposed to our own, right? Just think about gladiators and think about the fact that nobody who is not a landed Roman male has any rights, right? Not rights, has any, nobody has rights, but has any value. Let's put it that way. Okay, and contrast that with Rabbi Akiva, who says everybody is created in Tselem Elokim, right? So we have this very evil empire, certainly in the Jewish perspective, but they're very powerful. What do you do? Okay, and there are different, just as we have many rabbis, we have many opinions. We have people like Rabbi Yoshua, who says, you know what? Lie low, stay out of trouble, be happy that things are not worse. You have people like Rabbi Akiva, who at a certain point says we cannot live in a world where the Romans are so powerful, and he rebels against them. And then we have people who don't choose a different course, and that's, let's say, someone like Elisha ben Abuya Acher, who says, wow, the power of Rome, it's very seductive, right? It's if they're so powerful, then there's something to them. And that seems to be a very likely choice. It's very hard to be a Rabbi Akiva. It's very hard to be a Rabbi Yoshua. People look at the world, and this hasn't changed, and they say, who's in power? Who's strong? Who are the people that everybody is following? We're going to follow along. So Rome and how to cope with Rome is a problem that the Jews are trying to deal with throughout this time period. And with Hadrian and what he does, that in changing our identity, that makes things even more complicated. So let's take a step back, okay? Hadrian becomes emperor in 117. Hadrian is a big traveler. He goes all over the empire. He travels a lot more than other emperors. And he wants, his goal is he's a very cultured guy, and he wants to Hellenize. He wants the empire to become more Hellenized in terms of the gods that they serve, in terms of outlawing circumcision. This is an interesting question. Do they, as Roman emperors did, do they exempt the Jews from that law, right, and allow them to circumcise? Um, but he travels around, and in the year 130, he visits Judea. Okay, and this coin is minted. You can see on it, it says Judea. Okay, Hadrian. Okay, and this is minted in honor of his coming to visit Judea. And we have all kinds of different opinions. Our story about Bar Kokhba revolt is very complex because unlike the Great Revolt, we don't have a Josephus. We don't have a historian who tells us the story in a nice, neat way, interest as much as he might have an interest in certain things, but he's very neat. We don't have that for Bar Kokhba. So we have a piece in Chazal, and we have a piece in Dio Cassius, the Roman historian, and then we have a piece later in church history. And then we have archaeology that starts to fill in some of the pieces. And so we have a lot of questions. One of our questions is, does Hadrian come and create this city of Aelia Capitolina, and that is what causes the revolt? We're going to see that in a minute with the Roman historian Dio Cassius. Or is it the other way around? The Jews rebel for various reasons, religious decrees against them, and in an act of revenge or punishment, Hadrian creates this pagan city out of Jerusalem. we have differences of opinion. So the most recently we have found coins that say on them Elia Capitolina that have been found in Bar Kokhba hideout caves. So it seems that Elia Capitolina coexists with the Bar Kokhba revolt. It might have happened in stages, but we definitely have a presence of Hadrian. We saw our arch already. More recently, a gigantic inscription was found. It's got a hole cut out of it, kind of ignominious for Hadrian. It was turned into like a cover for a cistern. Hey, but we can read, we have another piece of it that was discovered earlier by the Franciscans, and we know it was found not so far from Shar Shrem to the Imperator Caesar Trajanus Hadrianus Augustus, son of the deified Trajanus Parthicus, etc., 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 dedicated by the 10th Legion Fretensis. Okay, so Hadrian shows up in Judea, shows up in Jerusalem. At some point, we have the Bar Kokhba revolt. We're not going to do a class on the Bar Kokhba revolt. We've done it before, and we don't have enough time. But we do have this very important testimony from the Roman historian Dio Cassius, right, who tells us two things that are significant for us. First of all, the order of events. And again, like I said, not everybody agrees, but it's a relatively early testimony, right? He's only not even a century after the events happened. So he says, at Jerusalem, he founded a city in place of the one which had been razed to the ground, naming it Elia Capitolina. And on the site of the temple of the god, he raised a new temple to Jupiter. This brought on a war of no slight importance, nor of brief duration. Okay, so according to Dio Cassius, this is the catalyst for the war. The other thing Dio Cassius tells us is that the Jews made all kinds of underground cave complexes. To be sure, they did not dare try conclusions with the Romans in the open field, but they occupied the advantageous positions in the country and strengthened them with mines and walls in order that they might have places of refuge whenever they should be hard pressed and might meet together observed underground. And they pierced these subterranean passages from above at intervals to let in air and light. So we have like a nice drawing here. We also have references to these caves in rabbinic literature, okay, and in other places, but up until the 1960s, we didn't have physical evidence, right? We had literary evidence. Then in the 1960s, we started to excavate, find things first in the Shvela, right, in the area around Beit Guvrin, Beit Shemesh. Later, we found caves like this also in the Judean desert. Now we found them even in the Galil. Up until today, we have about 125 sites, which include about 320 cave complexes. Some of them are very, very elaborate. They're inside, often they're inside underneath communities, right? Underneath the synagogue, underneath houses, which tells us that the Jews are united, right? A cave complex like this, everybody's got to keep the secret. If anybody tells about it, you're all dead. So the fact that it's inside a community tells you that people are supporting this. Okay? And despite the fact that the Jews were very united, they were very well prepared, it's very different than the Great Revolt. They hold out for a while, but it's a disastrous, disastrous ending. Many, many, many people are killed. Many people are sold into slavery. And whether or not Elia Capitolina started before, it becomes a very Roman city, and the Jews are forbidden to go in there. And this is the testimony, a different testimony from Eusebius of Caesarea, lives in Eretz Israel, unlike Dio Cassius, but he's writing later. And he tells us a little bit different. The Jewish war that was conducted in Palestine reached its conclusion, right? He's already calling it Palestine. All Jewish problems having been completely suppressed, right? With what our enemies love to say. From that time on, permission was denied them even to enter Jerusalem. And we know about this from other church fathers and other testimony, first and foremost because of the commandment of God, as the prophets had prophesied, and secondly, by authority of the interdiction of the Romans. Okay, so Jerusalem becomes off limits to Jews. And Chazal and people who talk about Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem, you can't forget Jerusalem. Jerusalem is incredibly important. It's all over rabbinic literature, much of which is written or at least compiled after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And Jerusalem is everywhere. We talk about Jerusalem all the time. You ever stop to think about the beginnings of the Masechtot often reference the Beit HaMikdash. There's no Beit HaMikdash anymore. But think about it. Brachot, when do you say Shema? When the Kohanim come in to eat their Truma, right? Shabbos, where do we get our malachot from? From the 39 malachot that you used to build the Mikdash, right? Measurements, come from the measurements of the Mishkan, right, or the Korbanot. So many we switch from an earthly Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shalmata, to a heavenly Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shalmala. We can't come to Jerusalem, so we think about Jerusalem. Now, this Elia Capitolina, as distressing as it is, we read it back into our sources. So take a look. Hey, Hadrian, he loves to put his face on things. We have lots of images of Hadrian. And he creates a coin in honor of the creation of Elia Capitolina. Now, it has a few things on it that are really interesting. Here's a drawing of it. It's easier to see than the coin. First of all, we have our same Rocher Tevot, right? Our same abbreviations. Colonia, Elia, Capit, right? What's the end part? What is the end part? Condita, founded. Okay, so it's the same idea in Latin. But what do we have in the picture? And we have a person with two oxen and a plow, and he is plowing the boundaries of the city. This is a very ancient Roman ritual. When a city is founded, the emperor goes out and he plows around the boundary of the city. And this is kind of a symbolic way of starting the city, of founding the city. When Jews see this coin or hear about the plowing, what comes into their mind? Because we think in terms of Tanakh and of Chazal. We read Micha or Yirmiyahu, it's also quoted there. Lachen biglalchem Tzion sadeh techerash. Zion shall be plowed as a field. Yerushalayim tiyeh v'harabayit lebamot yahar. Right? Micha, or Uriah, as Chazal say it, is saying Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, right? That's what it means. Sion Sadet Techarash is going to be a field. It's going to be nothing. There's nothing there. There's no houses. There's no buildings. There's no nothing, right? But the rabbis understand Sion Sadet Techarash means the Romans are going to come and make a new city, right? And that's where we have our very famous story at the end of Masechet Makot, right? Rabbi Akiva, remember, Rabbi Akiva laughs, all the sages are crying, the fox coming out of Har HaBayit, right? And Rabbi Akiva, why does he laugh? In the prophecy of Uriah it is written, for your sake Zion shall be plowed as a field. In Zechariah it is written, there shall be elderly men and women sitting in the streets of Jerusalem, right? I didn't bring you the whole thing, but basically he says, we have a pasuk of Uriah and Zechariah together. Until the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, I was afraid that the prophecy of Zechariah would not be fulfilled. Now that the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, it is evident that the prophecy of Zechariah remains valid, right? Rabbi Akiva, the eternal optimist, takes this terrible image, vision, right, of Tzion Sadet Techarash, and he says, no, 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 it's really, we've reached the lowest point and there's nowhere to go but up, right? The Geula is coming, right? And the sages said, Akiva nichamtanu, you have comforted us. Now, many centuries later, along comes Don Yitzchak Abarbanel and his parish to Micha, right? And he reads into it. He understands the history, right? Abarbanel actually at a certain point when in the expulsion from Spain, when he leaves Spain, he goes to Italy. Maybe he knew about Roman history. The Kfar Heidu Chazal, right? The rabbi said, Shacharei shechriv Titus et Yerushalayim, ימים Jerusalem, ימים נשארו כותלי המקדש והבניין, right? There were for some time the temple and the building was still standing. Tyrannus Rufus harasha natatz kol habinyan ad afar, right? Tyrannus Rufus, the evil, destroyed the entire building to the ground. הגיע וחרש את ההיכל ואת סביבותיו לקיים מה שנאמר ציון שדה תחרש, right? He says when Titus comes and destroys the temple, it's not completely destroyed. It's only the next emperor or the next general who comes along and completely destroys it and does this plowing of the field, right? So really fascinating imagery that connects both to the Roman ideas, but also to Tanakh. Once Jerusalem is transformed into Elia Capitolina, it becomes the hub, okay, of all the Roman roads in the area. We have roads that go out to the coast. We have roads that go up Derech HaAvot, right? Go up to Shechem, go down to Hebron. All the roads lead to Elia Capitolina. It's the hub of the road system in Eretz Yisrael. Roads are very, very important to the Romans. The Romans create miles and miles and miles of roads in Judea. Why? Well, first of all, it's a way that they can move their soldiers. It's a way that they can move their trade and their business. It's a way to establish dominance. It's also a way to have propaganda. All along those roads, you have what these things are called milestones. And a milestone says, Emperor Septimus Severus built this road, right? And if somebody renovated the road, you have another one. You might have a cluster of 3 or 4 or 5 milestones. And you're seeing this, it's not just directions. You have 10 Roman miles till the next city, but it's a way to say, you know who's in charge here? We are in charge here, right? And that's over and over and over again, right? And Chazal also talk about this, right? Some of us might remember Life of Brian, Monty Python. What have the Romans done for us lately? Okay, and the Romans do a lot for us. And the rabbis talk about this, right? We have the famous conversation of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda says they made markets and bathhouses. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, you think they're doing it for you? They're doing it for themselves. And the same thing with the roads. The roads make life easier for the Jews. They also need to travel. They also need to get their goods from place to place. But really, ultimately, it's for the Romans themselves. Okay, let's go back to our arch that we started with. Okay, and we said this arch is a triumphal arch. Okay? A triumphal arch here, this picture is a little bit inaccurate. There aren't really walls attached to it. From the time of the destruction of the temple, till the late third century, there are no walls around Jerusalem. Okay, the walls which had been built and rebuilt in Second Temple times are destroyed in the battles, okay, destroyed by Vespasian, destroyed by Titus, and they're not rebuilt really till the fourth century. So it's a freestanding triumphal arch. Why do the Romans are very big on this? Why do they build it? They build it to commemorate victories or events or a new emperor. Okay, this is something that is meant to show their power, and we have them all over, from ancient times to very, very modern times. Okay, in 19th century, these arches kind of changed to commemorate war dead, right? So New Yorkers will know about the Washington Square Park Arch, right? Or in Brooklyn, there's the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial, right? If you ever think about why are these arches, and often they'll have cavalry or soldiers on top, and it's meant to commemorate war dead, but originally it's meant to commemorate victories or significant events. So one of the powerful ones over here, this is by Septimus Severus, a victory over the Parthians in the beginning of the third century. This one, of course, is very, very famous, the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, which is a commemoration of the Napoleonic Wars. Often, like if you've been to the Arc de Triomphe, you know that it's at the center and the streets radiate out from it. So this is, like we said, it's not an entrance to a city, but it can be an important piece of the city, of the urban planning. For us, for Jews, one of the most significant arch really is the Arch of Titus, Arch of Titus, which is put up in Rome after Titus has died, but in honor of his conquest of Judea and his destruction of the temple. And of course, we remember it's actually not very big, right? Anyone who's been to Rome and has seen it, you expect it to be like up here, massive, but it's not. It's actually a rather small part, but it's a very, very significant piece because it's one of the very few depictions that we have of the temple vessels, right? We have the menorah, we have the chatzotzrot, right? We might have the shochan, right? And this is a very significant thing. And always it was considered to be something that was very denigrating to the Jewish community. Very famously, on Independence Day in 1948, the Roman Jews walk out of the arch, right, in the opposite direction, not as coming into Rome, but as leaving Rome, symbolically to say that they are no longer in exile, that we have a state. Now the Romans are the ones that are very famous when you talk about arches, right? Stam, you talk to people who know about archaeology, and you talk about an arch. Often they'll say, "Oh, it's the Romans, right? The Romans, maybe not the ones who invented it, but they're the ones who really made it famous." But the oldest arches in the world are actually in Eretz Yisrael. I was just at the one on the right yesterday. Okay, we have the oldest arches in the world. They are over 2,000 years older than the arches that we have from the Romans. Okay, they've been built by the Canaanites. The Canaanites about 2000 BCE. Very, very sophisticated culture. And this is a not complete one. Part of it broke, but this is the arch, the Canaanite arch in Ashkelon. And you can see on the side of it, but they had to fill in the top. But if you go all the way up north to Tel Dan, you can see it's amazing, amazing. You can see the mud bricks. This is a completely intact Canaanite arch, 4,000 years old. It was preserved because it was closed up, and we can still see it today. So it's not a Roman invention at all, but the Romans are really the ones who make it famous. The arch by Shar Shrem is not the only triumphal arch we have in Jerusalem. Okay, Hadrian puts up four triumphal arches. We have pieces of three of them. Okay, well, a little bit of the fourth one also. We saw the one in Shar Shrem. There's another fragments north of Shar Shrem. There's one inside a Russian church near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And then there's this one, which is probably the most famous one, and this is called the Ecce Homo Arch. This is a photograph from the late 19th century. And you can see what it is, right? We have our one small arch, we have the middle arch, okay, and then we have the little, probably another one on the other side, but it's been covered up by buildings. Today, if you walk down, this is in the Via Dolorosa in the Muslim Quarter, the only thing you'll see, because there's been buildings, is you'll see this little piece. That's all that's left, because everything else has been covered up, okay? But really, this is another one of these triumphal arches. Why is it here? Because it's leading into a forum, into a very important Roman marketplace. There are two Roman marketplaces in Jerusalem in Elia Capitolina. One is here, place underneath a convent called the Sisters of Zion, and the other one is near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Um, Christians, believing Christians, say that this arch, why is it called the Ecce Homo arch? Because Ecce Homo means in Latin, and here is the man, this is the man. And they believe this is from the time of Jesus. It's not. It's about 100 years past the time of Jesus, from the time of Hadrian, covering up very important parts of Second Temple Jerusalem, right? A Herodian pool, not from the time of Jesus, but if you go into the convent and go down to see it, all the signs are about Jesus. Um, okay, a little bit more about our Roman arch, and then we're gonna see if we'll get a little bit at least to our second object. I got a little carried away by the Romans today. I'm sorry. Okay, who are the army that takes over Jerusalem? Okay, so we know about two Roman legions in the land of Israel, two major Roman legions in the land of Israel. With the Bar Kokhba revolt, we have a Roman legion that's called the Sixth Legion, Ferrata. They are largely in the north. But with the Great Revolt and in Jerusalem, we have the 10th Legion, Legio X Fritensis. You have this roof tile here. You see it very clearly. Leg, okay, for Legio, X, 10, Roman numeral 10, F for Fritensis, all Roman legions had names. They had a camp by the southern wall, by Dung Gate of today. They also had in the Armenian quarter. They were tasked not just with putting down the Great Revolt, right, in the years 66 to 70, but then staying on in Jerusalem. They did a lot of building projects. That's why we have a lot of things with their names on them. Roof tiles like this one here in the middle. We have a whole bunch of these. There was a tile factory near what today is called Binyanei Oma, in the western side of the city. Water pipes, parts of aqueducts, and they all put their name, Legio X, Legio X. But what's interesting for us is all of the legions had symbols. The 10th Legion had two symbols. One was a warship that you can see up here. The other one, maybe it looks to you like a horse, looks to me like a horse, but it's not. It's a wild boar. Now, that's fascinating for Jews because, again, just like we saw at the plowing, the Romans might have their own symbolism for things, but we look at something, we Jews, and we imbue it with our meaning. And what is our meaning when we see a wild boar, when we see a pig? What's the ultimate trait? is a pig. Okay. And when the people who are sent to conquer Jerusalem and to destroy the temple are represented by a pig, well, the rabbis they can't let that go, right? That's gold, right? So here we go. We have this Gemara in Baba Kama, which seems that in the context they say it's talking about the Hashmonaim, but it clearly is talking about the Romans. As long as they occupy themselves with the temple service, they will not be delivered into your hands, right? This is advice that's being given to the enemy. The next day they lowered down money, right? The Beit HaMikdash is being besieged, and the Kohanim send out money, and in return they get a korban. The next day they lowered down money in a box as usual, but this time they sent up a pig. When the pig reached the midpoint of the temple wall, it stuck its hooves into the wall, and Eretz Israel quaked over an area of 400 parasangs by 400 parasangs, meaning the pig is taking hold of Jerusalem, and that's really our 10th legion. Okay, the two final things that I really want to talk about with this Roman arch. As much as we are not big fans of the Romans, and we're going to see that Hadrian doesn't continue and Aelia Capitolina's name doesn't continue. But the Romans do leave behind a legacy, and that legacy is really the urban planning of the city. Okay. The skeleton structure of Jerusalem today is very similar to what the Romans created, right? And you can see it here, right? Here is Aelia Capitolina, and we've got our Shar Shchem, right? Our Damascus. Okay, go away. We've got our Damascus Gate. Well, no, we've got our Triumphal Arch, right? Which today is Shar Shchem. When you enter into Shar Shchem, you have a big open plaza, which is what the Romans created over here. Okay, why is this erasing right away? What are you doing here? Okay. From this open plaza in Aelia Capitolina, you have two main streets, right? You have what we call the Cardo on the west, okay? And then we have the Eastern Cardo, okay? Those two streets still exist today. This is the Cardo that you see that goes through the Jewish quarter, and this is the El Wad Street that ultimately goes down towards the Kotel HaMaaravi. Okay, the Forum we don't have anymore. The Temple of Venus, right near the Forum, has now become the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Right around over here. So basically, the bones of the city were established by the Romans and later continued by the Byzantines, and they still exist the same way today. So that's really a fascinating thing. I don't think that they intended for that to happen. And certainly people who say, oh, the Romans are long gone, they might be long gone, but they left some things behind. Okay? And even more fascinating is if you look at the Medva map, which we didn't really get to today. Maybe we'll talk about it a little next time. This is a map of Jerusalem from the 6th century before the Common Era, discovered in Jordan as a mosaic on the floor of a church in Jordan. And it has very clearly the Cardo running down the middle, but it also has the gate here. And then it has this open area, like we said, this open area, a plaza. And what does it have over here? It has a pillar. Remember back to our first picture with the pillar with Hadrian on top. Now, even better than what I said before, people who ride the light rail in Jerusalem, okay, today it's in repairs forever, but if you ride the light rail in Jerusalem, you know that at each stop they tell you the Hebrew name of the stop, the English name of the stop, and the Arabic name of the stop. When you get to Shar Shchem, the recording says Shar Shchem, Damascus Gate, Bab al Amud. Bab al Amud. What's a Bab? Anyone who learns Gemara? Baba, it's a gate. Al Amud, Samud, a pillar. The pillar has not been around for centuries, for millennia, but the name has still stuck. So, you might be able to get rid of the Romans a little bit, but never completely. The Romans are still with us. Okay, but we still have to end this section with something else. And as much as Hadrian thought that he conquered the world and he changed the world and he erased the Jewish identity from Judea and from Jerusalem and he kicked out the Jews, but he is no longer. And this is a famous statement. Israel Eldad was a revisionist. He was a revisionist Zionist. He was a leader of the Lehi. He was part of the Tnuat. He was one of the leaders of Tnuat Eretz Yisrael Hashlema, the complete land of Israel. And he used to go to the Israel Museum on Tisha B'Av, and he would say this. נעמדתי לפני עיניו הכבויות של אדריאנוס. I stood in front of the lifeless eyes of Hadrian. ואמרתי לו, and I spoke to him, אדריאנוס, אדריאנוס, אתה שרצית לקרוא למקום הזה אליה קפיטולינה ולארץ הזו פלסטינה, פקח את עיניך וראה, היכן אתה נמצא? במוזיאון ישראל? Yerushalayim. Hadrian, Hadrian, you wanted to call this place Elia Capitolina and this land Palestine. Open your eyes and see, where are you? In the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. So Hadrian may have left behind many statues and many coins and even many monuments, but we are no longer in Elia Capitolina and we are no longer in Palestina. And ultimately, the long view of Rabbi Akiva is the one that saves the day. Okay, with the time we have left, we're going to look briefly at our second object, which is, I cheated a little, right? It's not from the Roman time period, but I do think it kind of speaks to, is in dialogue with what we were talking about with the power of Rome. Okay, and this is a very famous synagogue mosaic from the Galil, from the north, from a place called Beit Alpha. And as you can see, it's very, very, very richly decorated. We're going to look at some of the decorations up close. Beit Alpha up in the Jezreel Valley, not so far from Beit She'an. Okay, it was a kibbutz. The name Beit Alpha was actually an Arab name, Beit Ilfa, which is obviously going back to a Hebrew name. It was a kibbutz, and in the 1920s, they took that same name. And when they were plowing their fields in 1928, they struck something that seemed a little unusual, and they started to uncover it, and they uncovered this incredible mosaic, which you have to realize 1928, this is one of the very first things like this that was ever discovered in the land of Israel. And imagine plowing your field, good Zionist, and here you come upon your history from 1500 years earlier. That's pretty wild. And they call Hebrew University professor, very new university professor, because the university is very new, Eliezer Sukanik, and he comes, and this is the first official excavation of the Hebrew University, and they uncover it, and we discover this very richly decorated with tons and tons of images. We'll come back to the imagery a little bit later. I want to talk about the Romans for a minute. Um, and um, and they discover an inscription that tells us that it's from the time of the Emperor Justinian, meaning it's from the 6th century. And they discover things that really they were not expecting to discover. And this is all of these images, right? Now, if we remember back, I'm sorry, I'm making you dizzy. I'm just thinking what I want to do in the time I have. If we remember back to Second Temple times, right? What we talked about last week. Imagery is completely forbidden. No one has any images, nothing, 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 right? Flowers, rosettes, geometric designs, no images. The synagogues that we have from Second Temple times, this is from Herodian, but we have the same thing in Masada and in Gamla and in Migdal. No imagery whatsoever. Okay. When we go a few hundred years later to the late Roman and then the Byzantine period, we have synagogues that have not only flowers, we have animals, we have people. Okay, what's going on? The short answer is that different generations interpreted the second commandment of Lo ta'aseh lecha pesel v'chol tmuna in very different ways, right? And sometimes they said, well, nothing whatsoever. And sometimes they said, well, maybe it's something that has a symbol of power, has a staff, has a ball, has a globe. And maybe it's, if it's everything but not humans, and maybe it's our intention, right? Very famous story of Rabban Gamliel in the bathhouse with the statue of Aphrodite. And he says, I'm not treating it like a god, right? This is not a god. Everyone's naked. Everyone's going to the bathroom. It's clearly not a god, right? And I'll just bring you the last statement here, the Tosfot in the Gemara and Shabbos, which says you shouldn't look at an image on weekdays It seems that if it is for idolatry, it's not permitted, but for beauty, you may. So different time periods, different approaches. By the time we get to the fifth, sixth century, it seems to be very accepted, but even stranger, right? Remember our Helios, the sun god, zodiac, sun god in his chariot, right? What's going on here? And it seems that one explanation you could say is okay, the Jews are very influenced by Roman culture. But a different explanation, and this is the excavator from Tzipori who talks about it, and it works in Beit Alpha in the same way. He says, no, this is the Jewish way of representing God. We can't represent God. We can't make an image of God. So how do we show God? God is nature. God is in nature. God makes nature work. And we have this beautiful medrash, right? Merchavto argaman, his carriage is purple. This is the sun that is placed above and rides in a chariot and lights up the world. Helios, the sun god, right? He is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, a pasuk from Tehillim. And from the power of the sun, the rain falls. And from the power of the sun, the earth gives fruit. And therefore it is called argaman, purple. God made it to weave la'arog man for the world, and man is fruit and food. So when the Jews make the symbols of the zodiac and the sun and the moon and the seasons, what they're saying is this is Hashem's power, this is God's power in the world. Okay. And what you have in our imagery here is amazing, right? Here's our floor of Beit Alpha. On the bottom, you have picture of the Akedah, okay, of the binding of Isaac. This is God's promise to the Jews. Don't worry, Abraham, I'm going to make you into a great nation. You're going to have many descendants. You're going to have a homeland. Okay. The top is a picture of the Mikdash. Okay. This is the fulfillment of the promise. The middle is the one who's going to fulfill the promise. Only God can fulfill the promise. How can we represent God? By showing his power in nature. Okay. And Zev Weiss connects this to the first blessing of the Amida, right? The great, the mighty, the awesome God remembers the deeds of the fathers, the Akedah, brings a redeemer to their children. Now, you have to understand this in the context of this incredibly powerful Roman and then Byzantine Empire. The Jews are banned from Jerusalem. They cannot go up to see the ruins of the temple. They certainly can't rebuild the temple. They're living subjugated to these foreign powers, and they're remembering God's promise, and they're saying, don't worry. We believe that God's going to fulfill that promise one day, and that's what they're putting on the floor of their synagogues. Okay. Okay, the very last thing here is again the imagery. How comfortable were the rabbis in the synagogue? And this is sort of going in a different direction, right? Saying maybe all this imagery, which sometimes is very extreme. Synagogue in Chorazim, we have an image of Medusa, right? The mythological figure of Medusa. In a synagogue near the Kinneret, in Chukok, we have an image, we're not so sure. It might be Alexander the Great with Shimon HaTzadik. It might, we don't know, right? And Professor Israel Levine, one of the great scholars of the synagogue, says that the synagogue shows a synthesis of Jewish and non-Jewish elements within a single framework. The integration of these elements in every aspect of the institution, from the physical to the dimensions of art and architecture to the spiritual dimension of liturgy, offer a glimpse into the diverse and dynamic nature of Jewish life at the time, socially, religiously, and culturally. Okay, so we are trying to cope in this very Roman world in a way that shows our faith in God, but sometimes might be influenced by what we see around us. Okay, so let's see the comments that people have here. Oh, yeah, comments, yes. Okay, Jews born pre-48 are Palestinian, yes. Herodotus already referred to Palestine. I assume that that's the translation that you're reading. I don't know. I don't know enough about Herodotus and the original Greek. My guess is that he did not refer to Palestine, but I would have to do a lot more research on that. Okay. Romans called Paris Gaul. Okay, yeah, the Romans loved changing names. Underground caves and tunnels in the Modian area. Right, they were all over, much more widespread than we thought. Okay. Um, Shaul plows a field when he's king. Yes, but I don't think he's doing it as a king. That's meant to say, oh, Shaul, he's still a regular guy. He's not yet taking on the responsibilities of king. I mean, it's an interesting metaphor. I don't know if it's connected at all. Yeah, the milestones are like the billboards of today. Yes, I was going to say some people might remember or have seen pictures of the Burma Shave ads, right? That as you drive along the highway, right, you just keep on seeing it over and over and over again. Eventually, subliminal advertising, it gets into your head. Okay, Professor Sukanik is not Yigael Yadin. Professor Sukanik is Yigael Yadin's father. Yes, thank you, Judy. And everyone says, oh, he's Yigal Yadin's father. No, he's a very important person in and of himself. Hey, was the Helios and the chariot where there's science? Interesting, maybe. I'm not sure I agree. Merkavto Argamanus from Shir Shirim. Thank you for the correction, right? Not Tehillim. Thank you, Susanna. Okay. Other questions, other comments?
Did
If
you hear
not,
about
yes.
an archivist at the YU Library emailed me yesterday, wants to know if I had heard about this. Some radical right guys within the past couple of days went to Rome to the Arch, and they took, I guess, an old coin. I guess it was of Hadrian, and they defaced his image, and they blew a shofar.
I saw this weirdo article. Yes. So you see, it still has a lot of
They
power.
were they were undoing what Titus did. It's like,
It still has a lot of power over us, right? The symbolic acts. But I did see that. I didn't read it so carefully, but I know what you're talking about. It was very strange.
yeah.
It was meant to be like very messianic, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, she asked me what I thought. I said, like if they're defacing that coin, it shows that it means something to them when it shouldn't.
Exactly. Exactly. Symbols don't go away so fast.
Yeah.
Why did the Jews, in 1948 walk under the arch? And it's literally 1900 years later, and they have to do that. They want to do that. It's a very powerful statement. Um, okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom.
Brilliant. Thank
Vote
you.
to vote.
Amen.
Wonderful,
Thank you,
Shulie, as
Shulie.
usual.
Julie,
You're
you'll put the
welcome.
source sheet
Thank
in
you,
the
thank you.